I have a long treasured fantasy. And probably nothing I have to say now could possibly live up to your expectations. But it is my fantasy and not yours, okay? Mine is a fantasy that was born in the final months of my tenure as the senior pastor of a large denominational church, when I had to take medications to calm down my stomach and others to help me cope with the political insanity of my circumstances. I bought a lottery ticket every Saturday afternoon in those days, and I would stop at a store to check it on my way to church to see if I'd won, literally to see if I could call in rich. In those days, I dreamed of having enough money to buy a Starbucks on the coast of Florida where I could change my name and just stand behind the counter and make cappuccino and espresso drinks all day and officially stop trying to care about what happened in the news or what happened in church life. I never won the lottery, but I did find myself unemployed for a while, and I investigated the purchase of Starbucks only to learn that Starbucks doesn't sell franchises. All their stores are owned by the company. Returning to life in pastoral ministry was not a straight line for me, and when life gets a bit more challenging than I think I want to bear, I return to my fantasy of what I call my own personal Elijah moment. I'm sorry to be speaking so personally this morning, but I can't help but think about my Starbucks fantasy every time this Elijah story rolls around in the lectionary every 3 years. We read just a bit of it this morning, but let me remind you of the larger context. King Ahab of Judah had married a queen from a neighboring kingdom who was determined to replace the worship of the Jewish god Yahweh with her own native religion. Jezebel was a determined evangelist for the religion of Baal, killing anyone who would not convert. Elijah then has a great showdown with the priests of Baal, and it was a red-letter day for Elijah. He succeeded in calling down fire from heaven and then personally slaying several hundred priests of Baal. These were not days of great ecumenical relationships right then. Jezebel then threatens to kill Elijah, and even though he had proven himself not only to be a good friend to God, but pretty handy with a sword, he was horrified, and he ran into the wilderness to hide. He hid in a cave and prayed that God would simply take his life. It's all too much. It's just too much. Just let it end now. Now, of course, this story is full of hero-worshiping exaggeration, but the core narrative tells a tale that I can certainly relate to, and I suspect that most of you can too. He didn't run and hide because he no longer had the strength to stand up for his faith that he had defended. He didn't go into hiding because he was afraid of one single angry woman, even though she was a queen. He went into hiding because he believed that he didn't have any friends. Elijah was a powerful prophet, certain of his convictions, unafraid of his enemies. But as you see it in the beginning of this pericope we have from 1 Kings 19 today, it says, "The Lord calls to Elijah, who is hiding in the back of a cave, 'Why are you hiding?' And Elijah answers, 'I've been so zealous. I've been zealous for the truth. I've worked so hard, but everyone else has given up. Everyone else has given in. They've forsaken the message. They've simply accepted the superstition of the government.' And Elijah says, I alone am left." You know how a shy child will sometimes pull their shirt up over their head so that no one can see them, but in fact, of course, everyone can see them. They just can't see anyone else. That's one of the things that kids can do and adults aren't supposed to do. It looks kind of silly when an adult does it. But that's what the text says that Elijah did. And I love the fact that the New Revised Standard Version does this translation a bit better than older versions, that the power of God was not seen in a hurricane, wasn't seen in a forest fire. It wasn't seen in an earthquake. But in the sheer silence, it used to be called the still small voice, but the actual Hebrew indicates absolute silence. He becomes aware of the presence of the holy other. And he's so depressed, so exhausted, so defeated that he covers his face with his own shirt. In the months that have passed since my newspaper column ended, my mail has changed dramatically. The mail that I received for years in response to my newsletter article or my newsleader articles were almost all negative. I mean, there were some positive ones, but there was mostly negative response, and some of them were threatening. But the mail I receive in response to our YouTube and iTunes presence is almost all very positive. Of course, the people that choose to watch my sermons on YouTube are a self-selected group, and a newspaper is general distribution or circulation. But on the internet, at least, the people who don't like my stuff usually go away very quickly, and I don't have to hear from them anymore. I get an occasional letter from a fundamentalist who is always praying for me while they are simultaneously certain that I'm going to spend eternity in hell. I ignore those. But when I do get a negative response, and I get some, it's usually pretty forceful. And it's usually not just personal, but it's usually way too personal. It's angry and attacking. It sounds in a way like it could be written by a prophet who's hiding in a cave in the wilderness, who feels abandoned and desperate. One of our listeners is Tony Kashaba, and he's an Iraqi Christian, and he wrote to me wanting to know why I have not been talking about the slaughter of Christians in Syria and in Iraq by the ISIS extremists. I replied, frankly, that though I and other progressives try to address current social justice issues, that we're not a news service. I try to take a wide-angle lens view of social issues. I'm disciplined about exposing myself to a lot of non-corporately owned international news, but I can't say that in the course of my work week that I'm genuinely, comprehensively educated in current events. But Tony, if I may address you directly, though the plight of your people, the Yazidis, is dire, and I know that hundreds have been slaughtered and thousands more are stranded in the mountains of Iraq without either food or water. And I can certainly confirm that there is virtually no media attention being given to this emergency. I do not want you to actually believe that we are indifferent to your plight. The Yazidis, which means the children of the sun, have lived in Christian community in Iraq and Syria since the days of the apostles. Since the rise of Islam, I know that most Christians in that region may be led to feel a lot like Elijah, where everyone has abandoned the faith, turned to the majority religion, and now, under the Iraqi banner which reads, "There is no God but Allah," your people are being hunted down and murdered. There have been demonstrations about this crisis in major cities on the east and west coast of the United States. Some of them, one last week in San Francisco, drew over 2,000 people, but no TV cameras, no media coverage. No one seems to hear the cries of the Yazidis. Tony, I hear your anger, and I can bear the fact that you're even angry at me. Still, there is nothing that I as an individual preacher or we as an individual church could do to change the policies and the warfare of Iraq or Syria or of the completely valueless military action of ISIS. We have precious little influence even over the government of the United States. But what I really need for you to hear is that you are not alone. The only comfort given to Elijah as he stood at the mouth of that cave was, even though he felt alone, even though he was convinced that he was the last one, the only thing that God said to him that comforted him was that there were others. There are other people who care. But there's something more I would like to add to that message for you, Tony, for myself, and for any of you who feel like pulling your shirt up over your face and getting a meaningless job and officially checking out of society. In his book, The Impossible Will Take a While, Howard Zinn writes, "Consider the remarkable transformation in just a few decades in people's consciousness of racism, in the bold presence of women demanding their rightful place, in a growing public awareness that gays are not curiosities, but are sensate human beings, in the long-term growing skepticism about military intervention despite brief surges of military madness. It's the long-term change that I think we must see if we're not going to lose hope. Pessimism becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It reproduces itself by crippling our willingness to act." Now, I think those of us within the progressive movement have been successful on many fronts, even when the success has come way too slowly. And I realize that 200,000 refugees in the mountains of Iraq don't have a long time to wait for food and water and shelter and protection from a murdering army of terrorists. I don't want to be dismissive of their plight in any way. But even in the face of that crisis, the larger issue is the historical cessation of warfare. The issue is that we have to stop creating circumstances that create new refugees, moving national boundaries by military force, and allowing regional civil strife to turn into genocide. If we're ever going to do that, folks, we got to get out of the cave. We have to keep struggling to find each other. You don't have to be friendless. You don't have to be isolated. Pull your shirt down off your face. Go find your tribe and make your tribe strong enough for your voice to be heard. Isolation is exactly the same thing as surrender, and we're not the kind of people who give up.
Amen.
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Rev. Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.